All right, so today on the Seller Life, I have with me Matt Crossman. Now, Matt Crossman is a contributing writer for Success Magazine, which is pretty cool. A lot of us are like, man, wouldn't that be awesome if we were on Success Magazine? But he also writes in the world of sports. For instance, he writes a lot with NASCAR.com. But more importantly than all that, Matt has jumped out of an airplane. He's finished last place in a spelling bee, and he's even conned his way into a flyover before a NASCAR race. That'd be pretty cool. He's auditioned to be a mascot and failed miserably. So, Matt, thank you so much for being with us on The Seller Life.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
So, Matt, a lot of entrepreneurs listening look at a guy like you. You're on the inside. You write for success. You're a very successful writer. I went on to mattcrossman.com and read all the success. He's won a lot of awards for his writing, and he's gracious enough to just kind of share with me and my audience here on The Seller Life, like, what does it take to be a good writer and to actually get noticed in today's world? So maybe, Matt, we can step back. We'll get to that question, but just kind of tell us a little bit about what it is you do and maybe some tips and tricks that you've learned along the way to become the writer that you are.
Yeah, like you said, I'm a freelance writer, and I write for a handful of different places. I sort of think of them as silos. That I have my NASCAR silo, which is NASCAR.com. I have my business and personal development silo, which is Success. I have a travel and adventure silo, which is a magazine called Cowboys and Indians. And then I have my sports silo, which is a little bit of NASCAR, a little bit of a season preview yearbooks like you'll see at the grocery store, the 2020 NFL season. I write for one of those. And I like it that way, to be broad rather than narrow, because if I only wrote, like, say, baseball, or if I only wrote NASCAR, I would be bored out of my mind within a year. And so that's important to me, to be able to have a wide range of different interests. And really the secret to being a good writer is to start off as a bad writer and to write a whole bunch of bad stories. And then you write a whole bunch of not so bad stories. Then you'll write a couple of average stories. And then eventually they will become, hopefully, if I can say this, good stories. But yeah, about 15 years ago, I was applying for a job for the first time that I hadn't applied in a long time. And I had been working in sports, and it was a news job. So I went and looked at my old news clips, and they were so bad that I sent them anyway. And I almost sent the editor a note that said, I'm sending these with great reluctance because I could see how terrible they are. And I made it through the first phase. I never heard from him again. And it's at least in part because, he wanted stories from when I wasn't nearly as experienced as I was at that point. And now if I looked at stories from 15 years ago, I'm sure I would have the same reaction that, yeah, you don't start off as a good writer. You start off as a bad writer and work your way up. So.
Right. And you even have a background, a journalism degree, right?
I do. I went to Central Michigan University. I consider myself very fortunate that I wanted to become a journalist from, frankly, as soon as you are old enough that you can have a legitimate, career profession that isn't, shortstop for the Detroit Tigers or whatever. I wanted to be, in 10th grade, I wrote a paper about wanting to be a sports writer. And then I went to college, and as I got older, I became more interested in politics. So that was my career aspiration. I wanted to cover the White House. And so the first couple of years of my career, I covered politics, city hall, school board, like local state representative races and stuff like that. Life intervened. I moved to a new city, got a job at a sports magazine, and became a sports writer instead. If somebody called now and said, hey, man, do you want to go cover the White House? This White House, at the risk of turning this into a political conversation, the answer would be no. But under a different political climate, yeah, I would still like to try that.
That's cool. So when it comes to the actual writing process, let's talk about that. Are you asked by the magazine, like let's say Success, do they reach out to you, say, hey, we'd like you to write an article on this? Or are you constantly thinking about angles and articles to submit? How does that whole process work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's much more, I come up with ideas and pitch them to publications, then publications come to me. Although the publications do occasionally come to me, I like that way a lot better, frankly, because the idea, and anybody in marketing knows, the idea is really the idea. The first hard part is the idea. The second hard part is convincing somebody that that idea is good. And then the next hard part is convincing them that not only is that idea good, but that you're the one to execute it.
So who are these people that you're trying to convince? Like, what role in the organization are they? Are they the editors?
Let me think about that for a second. Not every it's all, the person always has editor in the title. It's not always the editor in chief, but sometimes it is. Like for Success Magazine, the first story I wrote was not the editor in chief. But since then, probably every story I've landed with them, I've pitched the editor in chief because I've established a relationship with him. Just like in any other field, relationships are absolutely, positively the singular most important thing.
So
what's that?
So how did that work? Talk to me about how you got into Success Magazine.
Well, the first idea I had was to do a story on a bull rider. And the theme that I was going to write about was toughness, that this guy had broken every bone in his body and kept doing it. And what can you learn? And also on a side note, he's also this wild and crazy character, which would come out, but the theme was toughness.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a bull rider, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I pitched it to a guy at Success Magazine who was a friend of a friend. And they said yes. I was frankly a little surprised, but I've learned that a lot of times if you pitch a story and an editor says, "Oh man, I really like that idea," I'm going to say no for this narrow reason. If you get like a positive no, I call it an almost. That I keep pitching that idea because I figure I'm going to find somebody who doesn't have whatever barrier that this other publication had.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there. So help my listeners out. When you pitched your idea, was it in an email? What did you?
Yeah.
So how did you craft the email? Like, do you give all the information? Because aren't you afraid they might steal it? Like, what's the best practice for that?
Okay, you know what? I'm going to see while I'm talking. I'm going to see if I can find the pitch and I'll read it to you.
Okay.
Okay. So it's always an email, almost always an email, just because in today's day and age, people just.
You're not writing snail mail letters.
Yeah, you're certainly, gosh, no, I wouldn't send a snail mail letter. And also, they just don't have time for conversations. Sure. Occasionally now, with editors that I know really well, I will call them, but it's 95%. It's 95% emails. And so what you do is you send a pitch that sounds like the beginning of the story.
Okay. Guys, this is good stuff. This is the juicy stuff. We're learning how a successful guy got onto Success Magazine. So let's listen in. Here we go.
So it's basically here. I'm looking for the pitch. It'll take me a second. Basically, you write the pitch and you open it as if it's the opening of the story. Okay. That's called the lead of the story. And the lead of the story always happens. It has to be the best part. I always tell people, imagine you had some great adventure or some really cool thing happened, and you're at the bar with your friends telling them about it. You tell them the absolute best part first. That's just how it works.
Okay.
And so that's what I did with them. And it'll take me a second. So I can't find it right this second, but that's how you do it. You craft an email. It's a selling document.
Okay.
And so
in the subject line, do you remember what you put?
You know what, that I'm sure. That was
to catch their eye.
Yeah. So it's always, the first word is always pitch and then colon.
Okay. Pitch.
And then it's something clever. And then so again, sorry that I don't have this right here in front of me, but
this is.
You know what I did? I called him the Dale Earnhardt Jr. of professional bull riders.
Mm.
Okay, so here's the first line. JB Mooney is a beer drinking, foul mouth, un-PC throwback to, well, not the good old days of professional bull riders, because these are the good old days of the PBR. Mooney is Dale Earnhardt Jr. in chaps at a cowboy hat, the cocky smile having face of the ever-growing sport that has gotten so big it sold out 3 days at Madison Square Garden of all places early this year.
Nice.
So
Creates intrigue at the end there.
And then I went on from there. And you asked about, people stealing the idea. I get asked that a lot. I'm going to answer that 2 ways. It's never happened to me. And, but I do know of people it happening to. It's very rare. And I mean, the first thing I would do is literally never talk to that person again. Cause that's the word is, stealing is not a good thing. Now, but there's a difference though. Let's say I pitched a profile of Dale Earnhardt Jr. to NASCAR.com, and they end up running a profile of Dale Earnhardt Jr. at NASCAR.com. Well, it's kind of hard to say they stole that idea because that's kind of a common idea. Now,
right.
If Success Magazine had run a profile of JB Mooney after I suggested it, yeah, I'd have been all kinds of pissed.
Right.
But that's so rare as to honestly, yes, it comes up a lot. It's so rare that I would say it's not really a huge concern.
So
I'm not worried about that at all.
So how do you come up with the ideas for submission to Success and other places that you write for?
That's a good question too. I have learned over the years, there's 3 keys to a pitch. It's what's the idea, how are you going to present it, and to whom are you going to present it? Okay. Those are the 3 pillars. And I've learned that early in my freelance life, I was pretty good at the first 2. I had good ideas and I could present it pretty well, but I wasn't doing a very good job of pitching it to the right people. And so what I've discovered is, as I said before, relationships are absolutely positively the single most important thing. I'd rather have a good idea and a friend to pitch it to than a great idea and a stranger to pitch it to. I become a little bit better. I become a little bit better at pitching to strangers, but because you're sort of introducing yourself and saying, hey, I want to do this story. Now you've got 2 burdens. You've got to convince them that you know what you're doing and that this is a story that they should buy. It'd be easier for one of those things if they already knew they could trust you. And so I've sort of, when I come up with an idea, I try to filter it through my existing clients. So a perfect example of that is I'm working on a story now. It's a series of stories for Success Magazine about the SAT for sports, which is basically the NFL Combine minus one of the drills. And I am training to see, and I have a guy who has administered that test to 20,000 high schoolers.
Wow.
And so he knows basically how good of an athlete an average high school student is. So I thought it would be funny to train to see if I could become, I'm 48 years old and I'm in reasonably good shape. Could I train to take the 40-yard dash, the long jump, the high jump, and 2 agility drills? Could I score within the realm of an average high school athlete? As an idea, that's pretty funny.
That's
right?
great.
You might be able to get people to read that. But where do you publish that?
Right.
Okay. I in the age of coronavirus, you can't pitch a sports place because there's literally no sports going on, and they have all these writers already who have nothing to do. They're not going to buy a freelance story. That's just common sense. But if I frame that as a business story, okay, what challenges am I going to face when I overcome it? When I take this test, and how can I apply that to the business world? Well, that starts to sound like a success story. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, actually, that's not just kind of a good success story. That's a really good success story. And so I pitched it to them like a month ago. And later on today, I'm going to turn in the 3rd series in the diary. So that's something I really learned over the years. I would not have been able, 5 or 6 years ago, I would have had that idea. I would have pitched it to sports places. They all would have said no. I would have said, shit. And then I would move on to the next thing. But now I'm a little more flexible in how I think about like where I'm going to pitch something.
Yeah. So you just pivoted your angle and thought of this not just as a sports story, but as a business success story. That's really good. So your pitch, is it the same thing? Or now that you have a relationship with the editor, is it just pitch colon and then the title and here's
It
where
still
I'm
is.
going?
Yeah, that's still the way I do it. Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, with them, I still do that just because I know they get inundated with emails. I'm friends enough with them that I'll occasionally send them, just, hey, how's it going? Are you quarantined type emails?
Yep.
But when it's a pitch, I make sure to label it as such because they get enough emails that I don't want it to get lost.
Okay, so let's talk about that because everyone that's listening is going, man, what's the point of even starting? They have a million people probably trying to become a writer for them. Why should I even start? So what would you say to that guy?
Honestly, I would say you're not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There is some truth to that, especially now in the last however many weeks since the coronavirus stuff started. Southwest Airlines magazine was one of my best clients last year. I wrote 2 cover stories and helped on a third. So I basically wrote helped on 3 of their 12 cover stories last year. They closed. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. Lots of newspapers are either furloughing or laying people off. Magazines are furloughing and laying people off. Websites are furloughing and laying people off. Advertisers are not buying advertisements in those publications, which is causing the problem.
Yep.
And so that means that there's a ton of other writers out there who are now competing with you for even less space than there was before.
Mm-hmm.
So now is honestly, it's a really, really hard time to become a freelance writer. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just you have to really think. Your pitches have to be dead nuts solid on. You have to be providing something that isn't being provided elsewhere, and you have to be the person to do it. That's always true, but it's more true now.
And maybe it's a good time to start with smaller publications and work your way up and build that arsenal so that when you're ready and things are back to normal, maybe they'll take a look at you.
Yeah, you're going to have a hard time. If you've never written a sports story, do you think it's a good idea to pitch SI or ESPN?
Right.
It's probably not. I mean, yes, that does happen. And maybe you're a great writer or have some particular insight. But if you're trying to break into the writing market, I think reasonable expectations would be, a piece of advice I would offer.
So when it comes to the actual writing itself, Matt, what would separate you from maybe the average writer? What do you see a lot of amateur writers doing that you're like, no, they don't get it. This isn't good. Give our listeners just a couple tips that you see. You're like, stop doing that, and you guys should do it this way. That's what makes a great story great.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Active voice is obviously that's number one.
What does that mean?
That means people do stuff as opposed to having stuff done to them.
So can you give me an example of that?
Like I swung at the ball as opposed to the ball was swung at by me.
Okay.
So the subject is doing the action.
So that's active voice.
Yeah, active voice. Yeah, that's the first thing any writing lesson that you take is going to say.
And an editor is going to notice whether or not you're using active voice right away and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Depends on how charitable the editor is. But yeah, if your entire piece is in the passive voice, I mean, it's going to sound weird to your ear anyway.
I went bull riding the other day and it was blah, blah, blah. Instead of I was on the bull and it was because now you take them there. You're like, oh my goodness, I'm with him.
Yeah. So active verbs, be as descriptive as you can. Don't use cliches. That would be a big one. Other than that, it's just practice. You just have to do it. That's the way to become a good writer is, as I said before, is to be a bad writer first and then become better.
Yeah. Is there a structure that you follow? Like if I go through all your articles, I'm like, this is Matt. I see him. Here's his intro. So maybe talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, especially with my profiles, I've done a lot of profile writing. I would say that my stories follow a fairly common structure, and that would be, rise, fall, redemption, and consummation in that order. And that would, most movies follow that formula where you introduce the character and then usually something terrible happens to that character, and then that character somehow overcomes that that bad something, and then the consummation would be lives happily ever after. Now that's a very simplistic way to put it, and happily ever after is an exaggeration. But that's most movie, every single romantic comedy you have ever seen, literally 100% of them follow that. If you look at,
We're very simple, us human beings, aren't we? We're very simple-minded.
I mean, if you look at we just had Easter. That's literally the Easter story in 4 words: rise, fall, redemption, and consummation.
Yep.
Lord of the Rings is famous for that. So that's a pretty tried and true storytelling formula.
And it's something about human nature that even though we know it's common, like we can't escape it. It's still intriguing to us.
It's common because it's true, and it's true because it's common. And one of my freelance buddies and I have sort of a running joke that when we were on staff and you had more time to work on a story, you might fiddle with the structure more. You might be more either aggressive or inventive or try things, because you're getting, if it takes you a week to write it or 2 weeks to write it, you're getting paid. You'll just, you have as much time as not as much time as you want, but you have more time to write the story. When you're freelance, you get paid a set amount. And so if you write it in a week and you make $1,000, you made $1,000 that week. If it takes you 2 weeks to write it, well, now you just cut your margin in half.
Mm-hmm.
And so chronological is never wrong. It's always correct. It's always easiest to read. And even if maybe telling it non-chronologically would have been better, we both just default to chronological because it's the fastest and easiest way to tell a story. And so especially for beginners, if you're telling a narrative story, tell it chronological.
Right. So as far as the actual business part of writing, is there still ways to make money being a writer in today's world?
Money, yes. A lot of money, only if you're a superstar.
Okay.
But, it's, I do almost entirely, straight journalism, for magazines and websites. A lot of people do, straight journalism plus, corporate writing or white papers or whatever. Yes, there's still money to be made doing that. People work for marketing agencies and write on the side or whatever. But it's always been hard. And the last 15 or 20 years, the number of publications have gone down, and the amount of money that they pay has stayed the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, you make the same amount of money now that you did 15 or 20 years ago, and that money just doesn't go as far.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like there's different rankings of press, and like at the top, I think of like Forbes and Success and Entrepreneur and Inc. And Google seems to weigh those publications a lot higher than others. And so is that kind of true? Like amongst writers, you guys kind of know who the big dogs are, and
it's you're not going to make, if you write for GQ or Esquire, they're going to pay you more than the Detroit Free Press pays you. That period, full stop. There's no question about that. But also the standard of idea and the standard of writer to get in there is way, way higher. So with the prestige comes the money, but you have to earn that.
Right. What is next for you, Matt? What's one of the goals on your list that you just haven't accomplished yet? You're on your way to doing it, but like, what's a dream thing for a writer like yourself? What would that look like?
That's a good question.
Because we all kind of have dreams, no matter what age we are. We all are like, wouldn't it be something if we did this? And so I'm just curious from a writer's perspective, maybe what that would be. Like, what's a win for you? What would be like, oh, if I could do this, it would be incredible.
Well, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot, and my answer to that, it kind of stinks. I don't know that I have some big. A lot of writers want to write books. My friends who write books all hate it, and so I guess I aspire to that, but I also know I've been around long enough to know that whatever aspiration you set for yourself and meet, as soon as you get done with that, you just have another one. And so I kind of don't think of it that way. I had a story a couple of years ago where I pitched a golf magazine to pay me to spend an entire summer playing the same par 3 course near my house, trying to get my first hole-in-one.
That is such, see, that's a great story.
Yeah, thank you. I was proud of that idea. And that's an example of an idea where I mentioned before, where if the no that you get is positive, you keep trying.
Yeah.
And so I did.
You could get that published in Golf Magazine. Like, there's so many people that would love that story of a guy who spent his whole summer trying to get a 3. I would read that story and be like, I wonder, did he get it? Did he get it? What happened?
Yeah. And so I sold that story, and that was one where I thought, well, there's not many people who would come up with that idea. Not many people who would. That's kind of a ballsy pitch. Hey, pay me to spend the whole summer trying to get a hole-in-one. And I did. I pitched it to Golf Digest. I ended up, selling it to a magazine called Golfer's Journal, and and I had an absolute blast working on it. But also, then you get done with that story and you turn it in, and honestly, not very much changes. The story comes out, it runs, it feels great, and then you just got to go right back to work on the next one. So
back to the grind.
And that story's at my website. So.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, this has been really, insightful, I think, and it's just been real to talk with you and learn a little bit about this industry. So any last words for people that are wanting to be up and coming writers? I know for entrepreneurs or influencers, I think that's one of, if you look at being an influencer as a big circle, a part of that pie shape is publications, articles, press. And that's one of the missing components that maybe a speaker who wants more speaking gigs, he should focus on that. Maybe writing an actual book is part of why he wants to do that. A business that wants to get press associated with, what they're doing and their technology and their practices. So you're on the inside now. And I think today, learning some of the advice you give and, sticking to rise, fall, redemption, consummation, how to write a pitch, emailing the right people. Is there any other last words you might give our listeners, how to be successful and how to actually get noticed as a writer?
Yeah, I would say that it's, when I went out on my own as a freelance writer, and I say I went out on my own, but I actually got kicked. I thought at the beginning that freelance writing was so unique as a profession that the only people who could help me was other freelance writers.
Mm.
And I eventually learned I was so wrong about that it's almost embarrassing to admit that I ever thought it. And the reason that I say that is that whatever the characteristics that you have that make you successful in your particular field, which would be, diligence, perseverance, trying and failing, being gutsy, learning, those all apply. It's apples to apples. Writing is just the particular avenue in which you will apply those skills. Now, the particular skills of writing, that takes work. But the manner in which you become a good writer is the same manner in which you become a good baseball player, become a good marketer, become a good doctor, whatever. And so it's, they're called soft skills. I don't particularly care for that phrase, but the same soft skills that made you good in whatever else you're doing that makes you think, hey, if I got some stuff published, this would help me in this other stuff. You're right. Apply those skills. Just apply it to writing.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I've had to learn that myself as an entrepreneur and now as a business owner that, you got to wear the hats of a lot of things. Same with you. Like you're doing sales, we call this podcast The Seller Life. Like there's sales involved in being a writer. Who would have thought? You thought I was just going to be a writer? Nope. Now you're a sales guy.
You said you are so right about that. And I really struggled with that at the beginning, understanding that selling was the tool that I had to have.
Yeah.
I looked down my nose at it. I'm a writer. I don't need to sell. I was bull. I was so wrong about that. of course I had to sell, and I had to learn. And that was, I'm still learning about that. I'm better at it now, but not only learning to sell, but being comfortable selling myself. Some of it feels like vanity.
Yeah,
It's
of
like,
course.
Hey, you're getting people to trust you to go do these things, to pay your expenses, to do all these different things. That feels like vanity. And frankly, it is. Get over it, deal with it. Because if you're selling widgets, it's the same thing. If you're selling, Henry Ford, to use a Michigan example, 120 whatever years ago, he had to get people to trust him that he could make a car that they wanted to drive.
Right.
It's kind of the same thing, and you just have to get comfortable with it. So
yeah. Well, man, this has been so good. I really appreciate your time, Matt, and I really look forward to reading some more of your stuff. So where can our listeners kind of check out your writings and what you're doing?
My best stories, the ones I would most want people to read, are at mattcrossman.com.
Okay.
And I'm pretty active on Facebook. I post all of my stories on my professional Facebook page. Post a lot of them on LinkedIn. I don't do Twitter, mostly because I think frankly, it's just bad for America. It's a bad
Twitter's
place.
bad for America. There you go. There's an article. There's an article.
Darkness and misery.
Right.
So I just choose not to participate.
Right.
But
You are not alone.
MattCrossman.com is so.
Okay, well, cool. Thank you so much for your time, and happy rest of your quarantine. And if people have any questions for you, is there a way that they could reach out to you, Matt?
Yeah, they could email me. It's my first initial last name, so mcrossman98@gmail.com. And I'm always, I frankly think that's part of my job, and part of just being grateful that I've gotten to do it. That if people want to ask me writing questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I mean, you emailed me out of the blue yesterday, and here we are talking.
I love
it. I consider that a little bit of giving back for the ways that I've been blessed in my career. So.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.